I think so.
We are kicking off. Let's see. Welcome to the Kubernetes Office Hours. It is May 16th, 2018. If you're listening to us in the Hash Office Hours channel, we'd love to get some feedback on how the stream is going. So with that, welcome everybody. It was a great KubeCon. Let's talk a little bit about what this is. So welcome to today's Kubernetes Office Hours. This is where we answer your user questions live on the air with our panel of esteemed experts up here. You'll find us in Hash Office-Hours on Slack, and check the topic and the URL for the event information that has the stream information and a link to a markdown page that has our times and all that stuff. We run one session in the for the EU that's happening right now, and then in about 7 hours or so, we run another one for the West Coast of the US. So with that, I'm your host, George Castro from Heptio, and let's begin with our panel. Why don't you all introduce yourselves?
Well, I guess I'll start. My name is Bob Killen. I'm with the University of Michigan here over in the US. My sort of specialty is bare metal on-prem deployment type of things and federation.
Since I'm also over here. Hello, my name is Jeffrey Sika. I'm also with the University of Michigan, and I do a lot with batch and cron jobs in Kubernetes, and I'm also just a general developer.
Hi, I'm Puya from Giant Swarm. I'm a developer advocate. I do a lot in security and authentication, and we do installations on AWS, Azure, and on-prem. And by now, I'm also a bit familiar with AWS China. So if you have questions for China, I can do that too.
Hey, I'm Ilya from WeWorks, based out of London. And I'm recently refocusing on developer tools, tools like Scaffold and other similar tools that you'd use for developing with Kubernetes, aside from like Minikube, Docker for Mac, or whatever. So that, and you know, before that, I've been working on some networking stuff as well as C+ lifecycle stuff.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna quickly go through some ground rules, kind of show you how it works. So here are the rules. First of all, this is a judgment-free zone. So if you see someone posting a question in the Office Hours channel and you feel it's too newbie or whatever, we don't judge here. Everyone had to start with somewhere. The idea is to give everyone a safe space where they can feel comfortable asking these sorts of questions. And you're always welcome to hang out in Office-Hours if you want a smaller, tighter experience than going to the main Kubernetes channel, which has like 30,000 people in it. While we will do our best to answer your questions, the panel doesn't have access to your cluster. So live debugging is kind of off topic. What we will try to do instead is kind of teach you how to fish on or where you can look things. So you can help us out by maybe showing us logs. But at the end of the day, especially if you're doing one of those things where you're on bare metal at work, everything's firewalled. There's not much we can do there. So worst case, we'll try to at least point you in a direction that will at least get you one step further to helping you solve your problem. Panelists, you're encouraged to expand on your answers with your experience and pro tips. A lot of this isn't just answering about why something is, or just fix something, but to understand the concept so that we can all get better at this. Audience, you all can help us out by pasting the URLs to the official docs, blogs, or anything that might be relevant to the topic at hand. So if you have any of this information, absolutely feel free to just whack it into the Slack channel. We appreciate every time you do that. Or stick them in the discuss thread on Discuss, which brings me to, we have an official thread here on the brand spanking new Kubernetes forum, which is here. I'm pasting in the channel. It's discuss.kubernetes.io. And what this is a new Kubernetes user forum. And we're going to use this thread to kind of like keep track of our notes, post videos of each session. And every month when we have it, we'll have a new thread with all the good stuff in it so that you can just subscribe to one thread if you want and then just get the information that you need. This also gives you an opportunity to post your questions ahead of time in a non-Slack manner if you want to provide more detail. You're highly, highly encouraged to take the question that you posted on Slack Overflow and then just whack it in there, because that gives us a place to go if you've already got all the information in Stack Overflow, because that's just a great Q&A platform. And then we'll use Discuss to kind of tie it all together. You can also help us out by tweeting, spreading the word, paying it forward, helping people out if you can, or anything, just telling them, hey, this exists. We really appreciate that. Each one of these sessions is recorded and available on YouTube. So if you're using this as a work resource, please give us feedback on how we can make this better for you and your team. Also, this panel is absolutely all volunteer only. So if you've gone through something really traumatic at work and you figured something out and it was really complicated, you want to sit on the panel and help other users, you're absolutely more than welcome. Just get in contact me. We're looking for people who could commit regularly. It's a third Wednesday of every month, and if you could do that we would love your help. So Bob can actually take a break one of these days. I've posted the notes in the Slack channel. If you want to help us take notes, that'd be great. And we're always looking for marketing help. So if you're awesome at social media, retweeting and stuff, all that. And then the part that people have been waiting for is we'll be giving away a shirt, some swag today. Maybe more, I don't know, depends on how many great questions we have. So the way it works, if you ask a question and we read it on the air, we'll write your name down, and then at the end, Jeff's incredible, guaranteed to be random algorithm will choose a winner, and I will contact you afterwards, either in Slack or via PM on Discuss, and give you a code for the CNCF store so you can get your highly coveted Kubernetes t-shirt, which we all forgot to wear today, so I could show it off. But they are great, I guarantee it. And with that, because Bjorn Magnuson was the first person to ask a question 6 hours ago, he gets to go first. So I'm going to go ahead and read it out. Question, you guys ready? Are we going? Everyone thumbs up? All right. Question around Ingress. What happens if the path of different Ingress resources for same Ingress controller and in the same namespace are partially overlapping each other? Will both be functional? If not, which one will be used? Example, first ingress route /hello, second ingress route /hello/message. What happens in request for /hello, /hello message, /hello message /send? Does the route examples make sense?
Yeah, I think I have a general answer.
Sure.
I think it really depends on your Ingress implementation. The Ingress spec doesn't exactly cover that. It's as far as I understand. Does everybody agree on that?
Most probably depends on the Ingress controller.
Yeah. I know HA proxy handles things a little bit differently than the Nginx one.
Yeah, but specifically like this, I'm not 100% sure. I would just test it out most probably. So
I think it might work as intended with like traffic, but yeah, I'm not sure how Nginx or HA proxy would work. I've used traffic most recently, it's unfortunate that you have to split out the configuration as well. So and how they split configuration, how different Ingress objects are handled is also up to the controller, right? Some controllers may wish to create a new like external load balancer altogether for that given Ingress object. So it's kind of like it's really up to the controller, unfortunately. So I think that there's been conversations about improving how Ingress works. So I think Istio folks looking into it. I think Dave Cheney is also looking into it, George, as far as I know.
Yes.
Had a conversation about it at KubeCon, but we didn't have the time to actually discuss it. There's been like an Ingress survey and such. So it'd be really nice to see some improvements to that. But yeah, at the moment it's kind of like it's very implementation specific.
Okay, yeah. So what I'll do is I'll post a follow-up asking what Ingress controller he's using, split that off into a separate question thread.
Yeah, I would also add to that if you do path-based routing, be really careful, like check if your code does work for that. Like I've seen people just trying out path-based routing, but their code wasn't prepared for it and it would just not work. And so a lot of it depends on code.
Okay, and with that, what's the next question? Let's see.
I believe it was from Toddy.
Yeah.
Yes, it's 7:54 a.m. Okay. One thing I want to remind the audience, if we accidentally skip you or we don't see you, please just repost your question, maybe with a question : in front so it's obvious to me. Okay, I'll go ahead and follow up with Bjorn and take it away with the next question. Bob or Jeff?
What was the next question?
It
That one
was,
was Tatty.
Yep. You got it?
I'm scrolling.
Okay.
But if you know where it is, you'll probably get it.
Yep. I got it.
I got it.
Okay.
Hi, guys. This is from Tatty. Hi, guys. I'm trying to figure out a way to gather Kubernetes events to be able to search through them later on so I understand what was going on. Can anyone advise on the best way to do it? I have COPS 1712 in AWS. The only takeaway from the official docs is Stackdriver, which is only for GCE, as I understood. That's more or less a question. Then he links to another one. I have a question about the right way to accumulate a Kubernetes events. There seems not to be any info anywhere else. So how do we...
Ivan already answered pretty well for that below. There's a link to Heptio Events Router.
Oh, nice.
It does some stuff for you. You could also just try to use, I don't know, Fluentd to ship your event log to some Elk stack or to some other store of logs.
I believe Heapster and the Metrics API emits events too, and those can go to some other sync.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. And if you have a follow-up question, also feel free to post again if you want more detail on that. Thanks for your question, Toddy. Evagni is next. Did I butcher that? I did. Hey folks, I'm having trouble with PSP. I want to restrict pods with root user to run under one specific service account and in one namespace only. I cannot make it happen even if I add the service account and the namespace specifically in role binding. PSP block pods with root user on all namespaces instead. Can you suggest debugging steps to find out the root cause of the issue? Thanks a lot.
What was PSP? I keep forgetting.
Pod security policies.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did a lot with pod security policies. It's basically you need to see how you are starting pods. So if a user is starting pods directly, so through kubectl, then PSP uses the PSP is used that the user has access to. So if it's a cluster admin, all PSPs will apply. If you have a deployment or daemon set or anything like that, it will be the service account that is used in that. So that might be an issue. I'm not sure how they are starting the pods. But basically having, what we do usually is like having a restricted PSP that applies to everything, like authenticated and unauthenticated. So you have like a, similar to like a deny all. And then you create PSP specifically for service accounts that you want to use. I wouldn't even do it for the default one in the namespace. You could do that. But basically, I would recommend to do it per app. So you can just really say, this app is only allowed to do this and that. And like only this specific host volume.
Okay. Any other comments from the panel?
Otherwise, with debugging, PSP debugging, I think the logs usually are a bit overloaded. They tell you like all the PSP or all the things that are not working currently. Maybe kubectl or kubectl auth CanI could help if they're able to use the PSP as the service account or as the user. It's something that they can try out.
Okay, and if you have a follow-up, go ahead and toss it in the Slack channel. Moving on, Janjake asks, hi, I'm interested in pods naming. Is it possible to change the way Kubernetes generates pod name? At the moment, it's metadata.name-uid-hash, and I want to change that to metadata.name-0123455, like stateful set do, but I don't want it to be persistent. Other pod can use that name if available. Also, is it possible to append VM FQDNs to pod names or at least pod host names? So it's pod name-host-machine-name. This will make things easier to locate when something goes wrong in a small cluster in a developer environment.
I think I think they shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't ever want to do that.
So let's tease this apart.
Yeah.
Let's tease this apart. Why wouldn't you want to do this? What?
Well, when you start appending like host information to a pod that's being deployed, you sort of created this binding. And sort of the entire idea of Kubernetes is that you know, when you have a pod or something like that, if a node dies or whatever, it can just schedule on another node. It should not have to be tied to the node. If you do have something that does have to be tied to a node specifically, you should use daemon sets, where you can at least use a node selector to, you know, target what you want. As far as the renaming of deployments and things like that, the pod, the hash that's put in there is used for keeping track of everything. It's how it keeps track of, you know, versioning, rollback, and what needs to be deployed.
So I think some follow up here, Janjake, if you're listening, is I kind of would like to see what you're trying to accomplish by this. Is there a debugging issue?
Yeah, it seems he wants to locate it easier. So I would just suggest use more labels, and you could even have something running that automatically adjusts labels for you, so you can select based on those. So if you really want to be selecting based on a node, then you could have a controller running or some code running that attaches the label. And
so I will be interested in seeing what makes you want the machine name at that point, right? So yeah, if you have a follow up to that, I will be interested. That might help us figuring out a solution for you that is easier than trying to attach machine information to your pod.
I think in a general sense, it's basically something that goes against the design principles of Kubernetes.
Right. Okay. Scrolling down. I see Ivan's here. Welcome. Mike Ortiz is next. Hi, I'm interested in the mechanics behind Kubernetes secrets, specifically encryption config. I understand that if I'm using the KMS provider, that key/rotation are handled by AWS/GCP, whatever. How does this key rotation work if I were to use the AES star providers?
I think this is about encrypting secrets or any other kind of etcd data at rest, right? Basically, if you use a provider like AES, you provide the key. So you also need to take care of the key rotation then. I'm not sure if there is any specific functionality built in to help you with the key rotation if you are managing keys yourself.
Okay, Mike, if you have a follow-up to that, that would be great. It feels like we need more information there. But plenty of time. We got more questions here. Let's move on. Ivesi has two fairly general questions. Number one, what are the best steps to diagnosing pods that can't be scheduled due to CPU node affinity rules, volume zone conflicts? Describing the pod gives information on how many nodes it couldn't fit for X reasons, but not which nodes. I find it quite difficult to find the path of least resistance to get the pod scheduled, i.e. deleting this one high CPU pod from this one node will sort it out, for example.
I pretty much immediately start with kubectl events.
Yeah, it is like an issue because sometimes you get like 3 reasons why it didn't work, and which reason is the highest ranking one or your biggest issue. Sometimes like try to go from like the hardest anti rule towards the softest. So if it's like host ports, that then you basically have a daemon set. So you can't schedule on nodes that are already have a pod. And so you are limiting your nodes that you can schedule to, and then you can go there from like CPU and RAM is usually the last one I would check. I would usually go from like the hardest one, which is like affinities and and things like host ports or node selectors and taints tolerations.
Now, when a pod can't be scheduled, it's stuck in pending, right?
Yep.
Okay, because I did find a whole section in the docs about debugging pending pods, and it's kubectl get events, and there's some information there. I don't know if you've seen the docs yet, but I will paste them in here.
And if for some reason that's not enough, you can always, get the logs of the scheduler itself and hop over to one of the masters.
Yeah, it's easier if you're self-hosted. You can just get the logs of the pod.
Yep.
Okay, and then his second questions. Are there any recommended approaches to splitting up Ingress controllers? One Ingress means a single load balancer, which is handy, but also a single point of failure. What are other benefits, drawbacks to one controller versus multiple controllers?
We touched on that in the first question. This is the different person asking, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
So the general answer I'll reiterate is that it really depends on the implementation of your Ingress controller. So different Ingress controllers will handle this differently.
Yeah, it's not usually not always the same. So you can have like a few replicas of an Ingress controller like nginx running behind a single load balancer. It's not always like each has its own load balancer, which would get you into trouble anyway, because like which one will stuff arrive on?
Yeah, so the assumption that the new Ingress object creates a new load balancer is incorrect. It may be the case with some Ingress implementations, but actually I can't think of one where it will be the case. I mean, the ones that I've used, basically, you get, like for example, with traffic, right? You put the traffic Ingress controller in kube system namespace, you expose it through a service, and then anything that comes through to that service through the external IP address of that service gets routed by traffic to the services in the cluster. So, however many Ingress objects you specify, they all sort of map to the same sort of space within traffic, within one instance.
I've seen people running a few Ingress controllers. Sometimes it's just like one for internal traffic behind an internal ELB, for example, one for external, or one for specific services that need a specific type of traffic balancing that another Ingress controller doesn't have, like having, I don't know, HA proxy and nginx for like the functionality and HA proxy for some special speed things that they need. I've seen that around, or even like Ingress controllers plus directly like services of type load balancer that like directly exposed for like high traffic, high volume stuff.
Yeah, so there's the Ingress class thing that you can specify, right? But is there a controller instance? Like, can you specifically address an object to a controller instance? I'm not entirely sure whether there is a general way of doing that. Even Ingress class is an annotation, so it's not the most general thing. So again, like we kind of hit the wall here with the limitations of Ingress API, which is not particularly extendable, or it's also not very. It specifies certain things, but it doesn't specify enough things for a lot of use cases. So be aware that whenever you use any features of Ingress API, it's all going to be implementation specific, basically.
All right, we have some follow-up comments on Ingress, but we'll get to those when we get to those. Sakib asks, question, I have a general question related to on-prem deployments where cloud services are not an option. I want a database that's HA, say MySQL in a Kubernetes cluster. How can I achieve this? Starting group replication of MySQL clusters and containers is fine, but I get bothered by volume storage. Should I have local volume storage on each node, or should I have some network storage?
Yeah, storage on-prem is always
there's going to be
like
strong opinions here. I know it.
It's like on-prem it really depends. Like if you have a really nice storage thing that has Kubernetes integration, you might have persistent disks. But usually you don't. And if you're running something like a clustered database, then you actually don't even need. You should go with local storage if it's SSD at least. And it used to be that you needed to do kind of volume storage there, which is ephemeral. But by now, I think with 1.10, it's definitely better at least that you can have local storage for stateful sets, so like persistent local storage, where you get like a functionality where the pod gets rescheduled to the same node if possible. You can have that like as a soft or hard affinity, I think even. At least that's on the plan for local persistent storage. I would prefer that, like if you can do that, if you can get like fast local storage.
Yeah, and if you get the right kind of replication going on, right? So I'm aware of the most recent project in CNCF. Is it Vitas, right?
Yes, I was gonna mention it. But.
So, but I've not read the docs, and I'm unaware of what kinds of replications they offer. So there may be the kind of replication that'd be good enough for using local storage, right? So if you have the kind of like, if you make sure that there are copies of data on a whole bunch of nodes, but at the same time there are many more nodes in the cluster overall, I think you'd be pretty good. But take a look at Vitas.
And I think Bob had an opinion.
Oh, it got covered. It's all good. But yeah, as far as the stuff goes, the local disk is good for databases and things that support that sort of thing. If you have a nice enterprise SAN, a lot of the vendors now have like storage drivers, PV drivers, and all that, and storage classes for Kubernetes these days. So I guess it just really sort of depends.
Yeah, if you're looking, now would be a good time to let you know the SIG storage exists, which is here. And they usually have notes on all sorts of external storage features and whatever SANs you might or might not have.
Now, usually newer model SANs have some kind of integration. Some of them go over RexRay, like the new like EMC Isilons, for example, and some of them. And I've seen even some that have like really nice native integrations. But usually you can never rely on that being the case, because sometimes you have just really old SANs and nobody wants to write a driver for that kind of, or maybe you get someone to write a flex volume driver for it, but like custom.
Ceph is also another really good option if you have that available.
Did anybody cover stateful sets? Because I don't think that was
local volumes, or
I don't think anyone actually said that using a stateful set might be another option if you are using local storage. That's the way you should go. When you're doing something like databases.
At least if you have a newer Kubernetes version, that should work.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, you might want to check out Vitesse because it feels like a relatively new project. And then I looked at the people who are using it in production, and it's actually quite a bit. So I was
when you see that YouTube is using it, so
I was like, it must be okay.
Yeah, I hear that. I spoke to the person who presented the keynote. I forgot their name, but he said that basically most of the MySQL community is getting around Vitas now.
That's good. That's good to know.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. Moving on. If you have any follow-ups, feel free to post them. Let's go here. Ivan points out the event router from Heptio Labs. 2 general questions. There we go. How's the audio? Let's see who else is next. Caparez asks, can we Kerberise a container to use NFS4 and Kerberos to mount volumes?
This is all Gphy.
Yeah.
So yes, you can run Kerberos inside a container and you can KNet to an endpoint. However, mounting volumes within the container is kind of problematic. And actually, that's where I look to Bob, since he's the one that dealt with mounting this.
Yeah, so mounting a Kerberized NFS v4, especially as a specific user, if it's a service account, it's not a big deal. But you're essentially be managing it outside of Kubernetes. If you want to use the NFS storage provider or something like that, there's the answer is pretty much just no, unfortunately. But it is what it is.
Okay, hopefully that answers the question. Sorry, I was giving someone some more information. Okay, have a follow-up. Post a follow-up if you want us to go into that.
They actually just homes for users.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we've handled that is the Kubernetes cluster itself sort of has privileged access to the NFS cluster, or the NFS server, I'm sorry. And then we mount essentially subders and mount the containers as specific UIDs and GIDs to lock that down.
Mm-hmm.
I can provide a link to an example for that.
Yeah, I've seen similar things, and what we did at one customer for this was also to have egress rules that only a single namespace has access to the NFS. So then at least you can control it in terms of if someone just starts a pod and knows the NFS endpoint, they can't just try to connect or DDoS the NFS.
Mm-hmm. All right. Suresh asks, hi, is it possible to have a single load balancer IP, which can be shared with different Ingress controllers like Trafic, Contour, Nginx, etc.?
I think that would be very complex. I mean, because if you share, you don't know which one will receive the traffic.
I mean, you could kind of do that if you're happy to stick another Ingress controller in front of that.
Mm-hmm.
You could use a single IP. Then you have an Ingress controller that routes based on host or something like that, and then it hits other Ingress controllers that sort of route to whatever services
mm-hmm.
have behind the scenes.
On-prem, that could be we're doing something similar on-prem where we have an external Ingress controller that routes to the internal ones. And I think Heptio has something similar. What's it called again? Gimbo?
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Ross talked about that. That sounds like a very similar solution where you would have this one Ingress controller outside that is, or in front that routes to the sub-Ingress controllers.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I would be interested in hearing the use case of having all the different Ingress controllers, unless you're just trying them all out. I mean, which is also valid. But so Suresh, hopefully that answers your question. Feel free to post a follow-up. Toddy wants to throw out a thanks to Ivan. Very grateful for you guys. Glad I found you. Glad we found you. We're here every month, so please feel free to come bring more questions. Let's see. Marquez wants to ask, with KEP 002 work being solidified, will 1.11 be replacing the need for cloud providers in cluster autoscaler with cluster API features? You guys see the URL there for the autoscaler? 9:18 a.m.
Oh, wow, this is very advanced. We need Chris in this channel for this. She's most familiar with cluster API, I would say.
Which Chris do you need for this? Chris
Nova.
Okay.
Maybe.
Solly might be if he's around too.
Yeah.
Or Solly, which
in general I would say most probably 1.11 will not eliminate any need for cloud providers.
Okay.
I don't think work on that is far enough yet, at least from what I heard and saw on KubeCon.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but I mean, there's plans to externalize the cloud providers, but it's very slow and tedious work.
Yeah, actually, and I'll do this. Let's do Marquez. I will, if you could post your question to that thread. Usually Chris joins us in the afternoon session, and I'll have her give you a TLDR and answer the question for you. If you could just plop it on there. So yeah, worst case, that's the person who's working on it, right? All right, moving on. Let's see. Bob, let's remind everyone that Heapster's being deprecated and replaced with the metric server while we were talking about that before with Avesi's problem. Let's see. Hugo Varela asks, where we live, we change the time zone twice a year. Do you know a way to change the time zones for all the pods on the fly? We don't want to redeploy it all. This is a very interesting question.
So the time that's registered in the pod?
I would say usually the pods get time zone from the machine, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And usually machine time is anyway UTC. I'm not sure. And then they can handle that in code. I'm not sure if they're using some NTP inside their container, which would make it a bit more complex.
Yeah. So follow up there, I think, would be nice, Hugo, if you're listening. So if the machine's time would never change. You would just change the offset, right? The question, I guess, so the question is do you do that in pods or do you do that?
It'd be the host level.
Yeah.
Okay.
So usually it should be the host level, and then it gets automatically pulled through.
Right.
Then they also don't need to redeploy pods.
Okay. So do we know that though? Like, if the offset changes, well, clearly Kubernetes deployments have been surviving time zone changes, but that's an interesting.
It should just inherit it from the host.
Okay.
Yeah. The question is if their code will handle a change on the like in the container, or if it like just handles time once, or offset once.
Interesting. That's probably one of the most interesting questions we've had so far. All right, Michael Morena asks, using Kubernetes 1.9.7, when I change a deployment, it rolls out properly, but it leaves an orphan replica set with the old version and it's scaled back to one pod. Am I doing something wrong or not accounting for something I should be?
It should be scaling down to 0.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the orphaned one is, or it's not really orphaned, it's used for rollbacks, and you have like a history. I think up to 5 is default.
Can you get like the kubectl like rollout history? Like, is it stuck in a like deployment, like something not being healthy, and for some reason it's keeping both of them around? That
could be, yeah. Because usually it should just be scaled down to 0, but to 1 is uncommon, kind of. Would mean the deployment failed and it stopped at some point.
Okay. If you've got any more information on that, Michael, we'd love to follow up basing on time. About 20 minutes left, everybody. Ilya would also like to remind everyone that Rook exists when we're talking about storage. We didn't even mention Rook. That's our fault. So Keith says, thank you so much. That does answer my question. Sweet. He had no idea about Vitesse. He's going to explore it in detail. If you have any information, if you go do some due diligence, by all means, write it up. Post it on the Discuss forum. We'd love to see how that works out for you. Let's see. Bob plopped in a link for your SSHD session gateway. Is this your Kerberos thing? No.
Yeah, that's just an example of showing how to handle like home directories and all that with NFS.
Okay, sweet. Let's see. Moving on. James Strachan would like to ask, anyone ever seen an example on how to use a meta v1 beta 1 table so that a CRD appears nicely in kubectl get foo for K8s 1.10 or later? Then links to Kubernetes issues 60,045. Let's look at the issue here.
We haven't used that yet, and I haven't seen that around. But there must be someone who uses it.
I suppose James already searched GitHub for that. I just tried to look in SourceGraph if there are any references that SourceGraph is aware of. I think all references in GitHub will probably point to first to Kubernetes, which is unfortunate. It's kind of hard to filter those out. Or there may be some places where it's used. I mean, I'm trying to look through that now, but
interesting. Oh, stumped.
So basically, it's one of those features that didn't get documented when you got added, right?
Yeah, developer features are usually the last that get documentation, because we usually look into the code and then it's still pretty hard to understand sometimes.
Yeah, but this stuff is kind of very complicated, isn't it? It's very meta. So maybe asking in API machinery is a good idea. Maybe somebody in the next edition of Office Hours would know.
Yeah, we'll definitely take notes on that. Here's a link to the API machinery SIG that might have a better answer for you. Let me see if I can find anything else. Totally stumped on this one.
Red Hat people might use something like that. They're working on a lot of these new features for CRDs.
Mm-hmm.
So they might have examples.
Okay, we might have to try this one on the West Coast edition. Sorry about that, James. But if you stick around or post it on the Discuss forum, I can definitely find someone to get back to you on that. Moving on, Ivan would like to remind everyone the use case is probably to save money because load balancers are expensive. With that, the question about the multiple Ingress controllers, right? I think that's what he's referring to. Bantu Geek would like to point out someone who's trying to plan a cluster and has posted a question. Do we want to address this one? It's kind of a longer one, but it's okay. Janjake has posted back. Thanks for the answer. This is the person that wanted to label the pods with the machine host names. He goes, I just find it easier to distinguish which pod have a problem. I've used Rancher 1.6 and Docker Swarm, and they name containers that way, app-1, app-2. But they don't put the machine host names in their equivalent of pods, do they?
It's not easy to change this kind of naming in Kubernetes because it's deeply ingrained in how the code works and how the controller works.
So your initial recommendation was just use way more labels. So maybe just getting used to looking at all the names through the labels and stuff, and not.
And if it needs to be automatic, then someone needs to write some code that makes it automatic, I guess. But it would be very custom because it's also a very custom use case. I'm not sure if Rancher has some like add-on. They build some add-on software sometimes. Rancher 2 might have some like additional stuff that they do.
Yes, and Ivan is typing, which means he probably knows the answer.
Yeah.
So we have about 15 more minutes for questions. If we have any follow-ups or any new things, Ivan just says label all the things. Good to know. All right, let's look at this planning cluster question here, which Bantu Geek posted. This guy CRG goes, greetings and all, and thanks in advance for reading. I'm not quite sure I can express to ask this super well, but it's Monday. Hey. It's actually Wednesday now, but he posted this on Wednesday. We're in the process of planning out a container rollout at the moment. We're going to be using Azure's AKS and doing this and trying to learn about Docker Kubernetes as much as I can. I find myself trying to organize the effort, decisions to be made, architecture, et cetera, et cetera. maybe some things. So he's got a whole list of stuff that we just go through. So naming conventions, easy. Anything to say here about?
I mean, naming conventions of what? Because there's a lot of different resources.
Yeah.
So that one's a little broad.
Yeah.
I think it's mainly what they want to deploy into the cluster. So this is usually about the process and organization of the internal dev team.
Mm-hmm.
And this is mainly up to the people. But having a convention internally, also for labeling, helps immensely. Like labeling the team that is responsible to, or even an email that I can mail when I see there's a problem as an operations person.
Sure.
There's like lots of things that you can do there.
Yeah, Ivan points out that naming conventions is better rephrased as a labeling strategy. Right? Yeah. Let's see, container usage and strategy. I think that's a little broad, right? Like how many containers for how many applications. That's like workload specific for that.
There's some like best practices, like don't use a single instance if it's possible to scale it to at least 2
Mm-hmm.
or 3. Use some like soft anti-affinity on it, so you don't get them all scheduled to the same node if the node goes down.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of like small best practices that you find here and there. Put limits on the container, put requests on it for the scheduler. But yeah, there's I think much more on the organization side of the company where you want to say what is my internal best practice? What do I want to allow? Do I want to allow all base images? That's always a huge question for like bigger companies. Do everything from scratch, have own base images. What is secure?
Yeah, like how are we going to run the registry, right? Like, can people just push anything they want in there? Who's reviewing that, right? And then he goes on to like networking, secret usage, and storage. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours on this. So let me just get to his bottom thing. He says, I know this is super broad. Sorry about that. What he's looking for is some kind of checklist or architecture guide or design patterns that give details. Does anybody have any recommendations as far as that?
12-factor apps might be a good pattern just in general if you want to go for microservices and containers, no matter on what. And it fits very well to Kubernetes because it tells you about like keeping configuration outside and like the one process per container thing.
Mm-hmm.
That might help.
It doesn't have to be all the 12 factors, I think. So some of the bits there are not so essential. I mean, actually, is this mostly about the app? It's not so much about the cluster, is it?
Yeah, this is. I mean, this pretty much sounds like the holistic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're moving the whole thing, or we're having a new project, and we're going to do it all cloud native in Kubernetes, right?
Okay, so I mean, I've compiled a few things that I'm hoping to put in a blog post. Yeah, I haven't got that ready yet. there are a few things that we shared at a workshop that we ran in KubeCon that I'd like to compile it into recompile it into a blog post. If you're really keen, feel free to DM. I may be able to find a way to share the existing deck. It's just that it was used for a workshop before, and we haven't decided on whether it's public or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I think I'll respond to his question with a link to the video and the timestamp.
Ivan also mentioned that you really should look into liveness and readiness probes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I could actually go and enumerate those things. Just let me pull out the document I have here. So it's kind of like it comes down to a few things. Aliveness and readiness probes are some of those, but if you just bear with me for a moment, I'll find where that file is. Let's find out. Yeah, this one. So so what I have is for application interoperability. We have a couple of things that you want to look at, right? First of all, you want to decide on your labels, and one of the recommendations that we made at that workshop was to use app label as a if you can't find another one that you decide on, at least have one label. You don't have to like use too many labels unless you have a particularly good use case for it. Many labels actually can cause a performance degradation in the API server. So health checks is the next one, as Priya mentioned. Yeah, liveness and readiness probes, and you would probably need to tweak the default timings there. And some of the other things that you may want to take care of is that your liveness and readiness probes are actually different things. Don't point them at the same thing, especially if that same thing is rather expensive, right? So your readiness probe could be an expensive one, but your liveness probe should be a very lightweight one. And service dependencies, ideally you don't want your app to crash loop if it can't connect to a database. And readiness probe should reflect the status instead. And you shouldn't really connecting to a database is just one of the examples. Metrics is definitely a good idea. You probably want to use Prometheus here. There's much more to say about that. And graceful shutdown is something you have to take care of. So your app has to handle sig term. And you might want to adjust termination grace period seconds parameter, because the default is rather very conservative one. So if your app can actually shut down pretty quickly, you might want to turn that down to a lower value from like 600 seconds or something like that, where it's set now. Or I forgot, 300 seconds, yeah. And then additional things may include your configuration and secrets. You want to decide how you're going to store configuration, whether you have whether your configuration is complex enough that you need to use a config map. You'd probably want to use secrets if you have any secrets. And structured logging, you want to make sure that your logs include timestamps and log level. You may wish to use JSON or a key value type log format, but that stuff can get very verbose and it's kind of love or hate sort of thing, right? Container image tagging is something you would want to decide about. So we recommend using branch dash short git hash or git tag if you actually do releases with git tag. And another thing, your base image is a big question here, but I don't think it's like, for a lot of people, it's kind of ends up a main topic of a conversation, but I don't think people should get caught up on that. If people can use Alpine, that's great, but I know how many apps actually depend on Ubuntu or CentOS and have this sort of very nested and complicated tree of dependencies that they can't deal with. And it's better to get it up and running on Kubernetes than make it work on Alpine, right? And you shouldn't have to use a Scratch image unless you're doing multi-stage builds and you know what you're doing, right? But like normally you would use Scratch image. I mean, there are some examples of Docker files out there that use Scratch image for Go apps, but it's a very poor decision to do that. Or you really have to know what you're doing, right? And in terms of like other runtime attributes, you have things like, for example, some apps write temporary files. You would use empty dir volume for that. And if the files are of small size, you would want to use memory as a backing store for that. And you may like to use init containers for certain things, but be careful when you do that, and you don't want to install packages or fetch files with init containers.
So, Ilya, we're actually going to run out of time here because we got 2 more questions.
Yeah.
However, you are working on this blog, so here's what we'll do. CRG, I'll respond to him with a link to this video, and then I'll give you the thread. And this will be an interesting blog post, I think, and maybe the start of like, there's no real like Kubernetes architecture guide, right? That's like, hey. Right. My company wants to do this. What are, you could probably rattle on a list like that for 2 hours, right?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I think we definitely need this, I think, as a community, right? So I think we definitely need to follow up there.
Yeah, and there are ways to sort of, there are certain topics that, can be dealt with without inserting too much opinion. So
right.
It's the purpose of the blog post that I'm working on here as well.
Yeah.
To sort of like outline some recommendations, but it's up to you whether you want to follow each of the recommendations or only some of them.
And he's on a cloud provider, so automatically he doesn't have to worry about a ton of stuff that an on-prem person would have to
That's right.
concern themselves with. So sorry to cut you short there, but we are kind of hurting on time. Thanks everyone for showing up and giving us so much questions. We love to have a packed one. Marquez asks, what feature should you expect to look for from a managed Kubernetes master nodes? Failover, replication, backup, cost offsets, based on what is offered today by existing provider engines, or perhaps isn't offered but will be a desirable feature.
I mean, basically just reliability. I mean, they should take care that it's up and it's fast enough, and how they do it and why they do it, and if they, I mean, backups. I'm not sure if you can expect it. You should always do your own backups, even if they do backups, because basically you're responsible for what you don't do and what you do, and the rest is it would be good if it comes with like same configuration and same settings of flags that you need. If you can customize stuff, that is a bonus. If it's needed, sometimes you need to see like how locked down the master is. Sometimes you might desire something that is less locked down and enables more features, like feature gates that might be alpha, but you still want to use. Depends on your use case a lot. For the beginning, I don't think anyone who offers Kubernetes masters does a very bad job there.
Yeah, I feel like everyone who does this it's like one of the main features I like about the managed clouds, right? Like, I don't want to deal with my own etcd and any of that stuff. I just want to pay for worker nodes. So hopefully that answers your question there. Cygnus8595 asks, when I set up an on-prem Kubernetes cluster, I had an issue where the kubelet container would die every night at 10 p.m. Ended up being a CoreOS update issue, but I never got an indication that it was down. What's the best way to monitor the control plane itself to make sure it's up and running? This sounds like more host-based monitoring, right?
Yeah, I would say so for a good chunk of that. And you can get at least some things like if kubelet goes down, it'll still report like a node down type scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking that
like Prometheus.
I was thinking you could set something up with Prometheus and like the alert manager.
Yeah, Node Exporter can get you metrics even if Kubernetes is not running anything. So
which one's that one?
The Node Exporter of Prometheus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mainly runs as a daemon set, so you have it on all nodes.
Okay.
And then you set the right alerts. I don't know. The Prometheus operator might help you with some like basic alerts in the beginning.
Okay. And then the last one, hopefully that answers your question. If not, post a follow-up on the forum, and then we'll get to it. Jay Sager, last question. Now is the time, G, for you go figure out the
I'm done. I'm
draw.
doing it.
We're figuring out who won the T-shirt today. I have a newbie question, if that's okay. Of course it's okay. I'm experimenting with my own Kubernetes deployment, following guides from various places. I've decided to try Calico. On the bottom of this page, they have a list of next steps, but it's unclear if I need to be doing all of them, if they need to be done in order. Can you offer some guidance? And then
sure. I just looked at them. They're basically only next steps what you could do with Calico, not that you got it running. You don't need to do any of those. But if you want, now that you have Calico, you could be locking down your cluster with network policies. So just browse maybe through their documentation. Maybe they have a blog post that helps you with that. Mm-hmm. If you're starting out with network policies, I would always recommend there is a blog post in GitHub by Ahmed from Google. It's, I would say, the best resource to get started with network policies on a user space level. I'll post the link in a bit. It's really good. It's just, I'm a big fan. I'm such a fanboy.
Yeah, right. And with that, we have one more question. Are we calling it time? What's your guys' time schedule?
It's 10 o'clock for me, but I can stick around.
Same.
We got one Vice key. Now make sure you add them to the raffle though, Jeff.
I'll redo it.
All right, sweet. All right. Last question. My question is about config maps mounted into the container. Is there no way to have all the dynamic runtime reconfiguration implemented via them? Are they so static that I have to use a separate config mechanism to implement reconfig without restart?
So that depends a lot on your application too. So like if you mount the folder and the config map refreshes, you need something that's going to do like an IO notify to your own daemon to sort of refresh its own config. It's really application dependent.
Or you could make you could make config map. You could do a trick with a config map name that actually enforces the pod to be recreated, but that's opposite of what you asked for, right? We have a sidecar watcher for Prometheus where Prometheus doesn't reload the config itself, but it has a config reload HTTP endpoint, and we have a sidecar that does it. And I think I've seen a few different implementations out there that sort of do config map reload as a sidecar, but that means you either signal the process, like seek-hub in Nginx or something like that, right? Or you sort of tell it to reload somehow else through whatever API that process happens to have, like Prometheus has an HTTP reload endpoint. Yeah, so it's unfortunate that this doesn't quite come out of the box. It'd be nice if we had a way to do that, but on the other hand, maybe that'd be crossing too much into the application itself.
I definitely think it would. A lot of them have their own, they might have their own thing for restarting, reloading a config, especially if they have like a long boot sequence, or it does rely on something like the whole init containers or something like that to take care of some aspect of it.
And you could also, like in some cases, you could fetch the configuration through the Kubernetes API actually. So that's also an option. And you could watch config map through the API. That's I do have to go, guys, though.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having. Well,
there is also, I think, a very, very long issue already existing for maybe more than a year, talking about how we can maybe have some like config map rollout hooks or post rollout hooks in there. I think the use cases are so vast that it's still very hard to build the feature, but the sidecar is a bit workaround, let's say.
Okay, and with that, we're going to wrap it up. First, you want to announce the winner in the channel, Jiffy?
Yes.
Let us know who it is.
Sorry, Kat. I'm going to butcher this name, but janjake, DJANJIC. Also mention them in chat.
Sweet. Winner of a Kubernetes shirt. So after this, PM me on Slack, and I'll give you a code to the CNCF store. And thanks for everybody who brought their questions. I'd like to thank the following companies for supporting the community with developer volunteers: Amazon, Bitnami, Giant Swarm, Heptio, Liquid Web, Northwestern Mutual, Packet.net, Pivotal, Red Hat, Weaveworks, the University of Michigan, and VMware. All these companies have donated at least some engineering time for this office hours, so check them out. Thanks to those companies for allowing their engineers to spend time with us. We will be giving out a t-shirt every session, so we're doing this again in 5 or 6 hours. We'll make the announcements in the office hours channels and the usual suspects. And like we said, feel free to post in the discuss.kubernetes.io. The panelists will be monitoring stuff there, and we'll be posting links to the videos, links to all the URLs we use, the logs, and all that stuff. And lastly, feel free to hang out in office-hours afterwards. I like to build a little community here of people that are looking for help and people looking to offer help. So with that, always thank you very much. Please like, share, and subscribe to this video, and we'll see everyone in a few hours. Remember, third Wednesday of every month. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, our panelists. You guys want to say goodbye?
See ya.
Think about all the t-shirts you'll be giving away.
Yeah.
Oh, and if you didn't win a shirt, you can actually post on the Introduce Yourself thread on Discuss, and on Friday I'll be giving it out another shirt. So yeah, they're gonna regret giving me the t-shirt keys. All right, we'll see everyone later. Thank you.